Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Again, it's always a pleasure to have somebody on the show who we've never had on, but who brings a familiar topic to the conversation. We love talking about UFOs. We love talking about alien abductions, be it alleged or maybe there's some proof there to back it up. I feel like this filmmaker who we have on today did a really good job in breaking down this remarkable account that happened many decades ago. But Tim, something that happened many moments ago was my need to know your mood. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. Yeah, I'm excited to introduce this conversation that we have with filmmaker Darcy Weir. And Darcy just made a 4-part docuseries that is available to stream. It's called Pascagoula 73, and it is about an alleged UFO sighting and alien abduction that took place in Pascagoula in 1973, and that's Mississippi. So it is a wild story. We get into the abduction of Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, and a little bit about Maria Blair as well. It is a pretty interesting conversation.
Yes, I especially like how we were able to go down different paths in this conversation. Like, how did this abduction differ or was similar to other notable abductions in the past? The accounts that these individuals had, the accounts of what the aliens looked like, especially when you put those in comparison with the typical accounts you hear, ones that are described as the Greys. But we also get a little bit more into what does this mean, though? If they're true, how do we benefit from this? What's the overall takeaway that we have from this? Again, fun conversation, very fascinating conversation with a really talented filmmaker.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fun having these conversations about UFOs and aliens and things like that. And really just the possibilities are, I don't know, they scratch that itch for me, at least, of, an interesting conversation. So we definitely hope you enjoy this conversation with filmmaker Darcy Weir of Pascagoula 73. There are links in the show notes to where you can watch this docuseries.
And you can follow Darcy Weir on Instagram at Darcy Weir Films.
And follow us at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Darcy.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Darcy Weir, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Good. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. How are you doing?
We're doing great. We were just talking before we started recording. What you work on is so interesting to us, and I guess kind of, I don't want to say terrifying, but it makes you think. It makes you open your eyes up a little bit wider. You have this incredible resume on IMDb, but for anyone out there who does not know who you are, can you just give a bit of background on yourself and maybe a little bit of what brings you to the show today?
Sure. I am an independent documentarian. I've been producing these docs for over a decade now. I got my start by making a documentary on an individual named Phil Schneider, who talked about underground bases and fighting aliens and all kinds of wacky stuff. He came from the UFO community. That first doc I published just on YouTube for free back in 2012. It was feature length, and it racked up like just south of 4 million views. I realized I could do this, so I just kept this skill in my back pocket. I worked 9 to 5 in other things, as probably you guys do as podcasters. Eventually, I ended up going full-time and producing these docs. I've done stories on Bitcoin. I made a documentary called The Bitcoin Field Guide. I made 2 on cryptids like Bigfoot. The vast majority of my catalog is based off of stories that come from the UFO community.
Okay, good. And we'll get into the UFO stories very soon. But before we do, I got to know, what's your favorite cryptid?
Probably...
And mine's Mothman.
Probably Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Yeah. What's yours, Mothman?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just. It's a long run joke on the show that Lance hates when I ask anyone about Mothman, but I love to because it is such an amazing story and cryptid. But Bigfoot, definitely some merit there too. You a Bigfoot believer?
The first documentary I was supposed to make, or that I made and I eventually changed the name, was supposed to be called The Last Sasquatch, because my theory was that the Patterson-Gimlin footage was probably the best footage we've ever had, and that and earlier recordings of supposed Sasquatch were probably real, and I figured it just might have been a small group of relic sort of hominids that weren't modern humans, but some other upright hominid that lived scarcely in the forest. And I wanted to call it The Last Sasquatch, but some dickhead made a horror movie and already used that name. So I called it The Unwanted Sasquatch. And that's a weird name too. So I think it's possible that these things have existed, because we do have a fossil record of all kinds of hominids that lived on the planet while modern humans did. For example, Australopithecus and even Gigantopithecus, we found remains of theirs that carbon date to about 200,000 years ago. The natives, or the indigenous peoples, the non-whites that lived closer to forests and stuff like that, have tales of crossing paths with these types of things and sometimes battling them. So yeah, I think that is a creature that possibly did exist.
Just to keep going down this line of thought and this path, have you ever actively gone out to search for these things without cameras, without any motivation to make something other than a documentary, just to satisfy your own curiosity? Do you sometimes just stop on the side of the road and get out of your car and just kind of wait to see if you see anything?
Where I made those two cryptid docs, the Sasquatch ones, I was living in British Columbia. British Columbia is actually where the word came from. This English teacher back in the 1800s lived on an indigenous reserve, and he was hearing from their, tales that these things existed, and they told stories to their kids not to wander in the forest alone and stuff because of that. We know that primates do eat the young of other primates sometimes in the wild. I don't know if that's real in terms of this cryptid. I, at one point, was pretty convinced that these things did exist somewhere in BC. And I remember going on like a weekend trip with my then girlfriend, and we were like staying in an area, a park called Sasquatch National Park in British Columbia. Go figure the name, right? It's a massive park, and it has some cottages and stuff, or campgrounds, and we were staying at this cottage. And at night, I think I drove her nuts, because one night we pulled off the side of the road and put down the windows, turned off the car lights, and just listened to the forest. There was nothing but crickets and other normal animal noises probably. But yeah, that's my only non-film sort of Sasquatch hunting moment. I'm not brave enough to, camp out and do all that stuff to find these things.
Yeah, it seems pretty creepy. I'm not really a big fan of the woods myself, but UFOs. You have made a new docu-series called Pascagoula 73. Can you tell us a little bit about this story?
Yeah, so October 11th, 1973, two Mississippi men who were fishing that night on the river of Pascagoula. They showed up in town quite in distress. They tried to get into the local newspaper that was closed. They called the Air Force. The Air Force said, "We're not interested in speaking to you because we closed our research on these types of cases during the Project Blue Book era. They're not real." And then they called the police. The sheriff picked them up, and they told this story that they were taken aboard a craft, a non-human craft by non-humans, examined, and then placed back on the riverbank.
I remember hearing about this a long, long time ago, and I thought it was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, but I can't seem to find that episode. But this was the first story that I remember as a kid. It genuinely got under my skin. Really is a disturbing account of an abduction, because it stands out from the classic shape that the figure is. We know that classic head shape in the eyes. Can you describe a little bit about what they claim they saw as far as what these beings look like?
The classic shape you're discussing, first of all, is the fabled gray. The gray alien is like this small, spindly creature, very thin. I mean, depending on the types, because apparently there's different types of these things. There's tall grays, there's short grays, there's, whatever, some kind of hybrids or things that just look like grays, but maybe don't have big black eyes. They have like oversized human eyes with white in them and, a normal iris and stuff. The large shaped head with the big black almond shaped eyes are something that has become common in the UFO field to report from contactees or abductees, experiencers. With this case, Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson. Charlie Hickson was 42 years old. Calvin Parker was 19. Big age disparity there. They recalled these strange kind of like robotic, floating, gray-skinned still, but wrinkly like elephant skin beings with these spikes protruding from their heads. So like one through the middle of their forehead and then where their ears would be, but they didn't have ears, a metal spike coming out on either side of their head. No eyes, no mouth. Their hands were more like pincers or they weren't hands. They had like 2 digits type thing, claws, let's say, and they were picked up by these things and taken aboard a craft.
Very interesting stuff, because in your docuseries, you get to see both of those guys, Calvin and Charlie, and they clearly believe that something happened to them. Like what they're describing, it's pretty evident that they believe that. Whether you as the viewer believes it or not, I guess that's up to you. How did you tackle the idea of their credibility?
That's the thing. When people talk about being abducted, the mainstream population never believe these people. They think they're nuts, they're crazy, or trying to get attention or something, right? There is a real stigma there, but there's multiple abductee cases. There's so many. In fact, I've said this on a few other shows. Have you heard of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former astronaut, no longer with us? He was on Apollo 14.
Yeah.
So he started a research foundation, the Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation. He created the study FREE, F-R-E-E, Foundation for Research of Extraterrestrial Extraordinary Claims, or something like that. And they compiled all of these experiencers that had similar incidents like this. They reviewed over 3,000 really credible cases. So it's not just Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson that have had strange experiences like this, right? Many, many people around the world, in fact, have reported this. If one of these cases is true, it changes the way we look at reality in the mainstream. But how do I determine if these guys told the absolute truth and nothing but the truth? I can't guarantee that they did. I'm telling that story the way that they interpreted their experiences, all the evidence around that case. So we do know that there was at least a dozen witnesses that came forward and talked about seeing craft that night. And we show some of those witnesses and discuss how they were found. Some of them didn't come forward willingly. They had to be actually tracked down by Philip Mansell, this British researcher who wrote the books on this case. That's an interesting sort of detail that makes it more credible. Sheriff Fred Diamond, who had his men pick them up that night and championed this case, really, he himself reported to the newspaper that he saw that object that night and 2 nights before. So during this time on the Pascagoula River in this area of Mississippi, many people were witnessing this stuff. And in fact, the police station that night received something like 50 calls from concerned citizens that had seen this object flying around in the sky. These men came forward and said, we were taken by this object, by the beings, and so on and so forth. It's a thing that there's a stigma around UFOs, and for many decades, people believed that those didn't exist. It was even worse to proclaim that you went aboard one of these things, right? So that stigma is even harder. I think that's what I can say about that.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I got to set sort of the geography for some of the people out there who might not be very familiar with that area. Can you just explain the geography, where this is, where on the water, where in the country, and is there anything that could be explained based on the geography of that area of what these people saw, or maybe not?
Where they saw this was on a river that connects up to the ocean, to the Gulf of Mexico, basically. You're in Mississippi. It's the deep south, it's hot. There are naval installations around there. Some people have claimed in the past that the men just saw a submarine, and the people that came out of it were possibly Russians that took them and kind of kidnapped them temporarily and then put them back. I think that doesn't line up with what people saw in the sky from around that area. It's like a swampy river / tropical area.
I think that is important to explain because you can almost feel how hot it is. Like, you can almost feel how humid it is. You go back in time and it's like you're sweating just like watching this. So it's already giving you this uncomfortable feeling. And to add on this like almost Swamp Thing type thing that has appeared, again, is one of the more frightening aspects of this story.
That's actually kind of flattering. I never would have thought that watching the documentary made people feel sweaty and uncomfortable like that. I tried to capture what the area was like and I guess the environment around there. But there's so much archival that I was supplied by Philip Mantle, the British man who was investigating this, pictures of their apartment at the time and the river itself, and recreations of pictures of the shipyard where they worked, because they worked at this like big, boggy, unclean, heavy metal shipyard. The river itself, I mean, somebody asked me recently, do you think the fish that they would have caught on that river would have been edible? And I'm like, yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. I don't think I would have been eating that. But maybe they were just sport fishing to talk to each other and enjoy something that wasn't work.
And later in the docuseries, you speak with Maria Blair, who was also abducted. And if I'm not mistaken, was she abducted from like the same spot as Calvin?
She tells this tale that her and her husband were taken from across the river, which is this pier that faced where Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson were sitting.
So in the same area?
Yeah.
Was her story about the same as theirs, as far as being kind of like consciously paralyzed?
Yeah, she said that she was taken, she was paralyzed, and then medical procedures were carried out on her. And hers is a little bit more enhanced, let's say. She discusses how reproductive material was taken from her. And she says that her daughter was like a hybrid or something like that. It gets pretty out there.
So where are you on all that? Is that all a possibility? And what the hell is happening if any of this is true?
I don't know. I don't know where I'm at on that. I know that this is something that's commonly discussed in the abduction circles. There's a doctor named David Jacobs who wrote multiple books about this hybridization program. He interviewed many, many, many people that claimed to have been abducted, much like Bud Hopkins. If you've seen the Manhattan abduction documentary on Netflix, they were actually friends. And I think much of Bud Hopkins' library of witnesses and cases and people that he hypnotized and interviewed, all that data went to Dr. Jacobs after Bud Hopkins passed away. I think we would have to take genetic tests and really flesh out, no pun intended, like what is going on here. I can't say. This is just their claim.
What about their claim is similar or dissimilar from others who have made the headlines as far as like, Travis Walton or Whitley Strieber or Barney and Betty Hill? In your experience and opinion, what is different and what is similar between all of these stories?
Barney and Betty Hill both recall having medical procedures done on them. In fact, Betty said a needle was stuck into her abdomen and they extracted fairly crudely some reproductive material from her. Barney said they took reproductive material from him. And, that was the first really famous case back in the 60s. Travis Walton did not recall having reproductive material taken from him. He was kind of zapped by a UFO, paralyzed, woke up on the ship, saw these gray looking aliens that weren't quite grays because they had like almost human looking eyes, but much larger and bald, big heads. He walked around the craft for a bit, checked out some like console chair apparently, and then was greeted by gorgeous looking humans that didn't speak to him, took him back to the room, and then gassed him and put him under. Whitley Strieber, he definitely has discussed reproductive material being taken, and he's also been behind the idea of a hybridization program, the mixing of humans and possibly the captor's DNA to create children that look like us but are superior. Who knows? So very similar, yeah. But Charlie Hickson did not recall any reproductive material taken from him. He did not discuss a medical procedure happening on the ship where they took blood or anything like that. He just said that he was suspended in the air and this kind of like orb-like object came out of the wall and examined him, kind of scanned him. Calvin's tale is very different from Charlie's.
Yeah, what does Calvin say?
Did you watch the doc?
Yeah.
Well, what did he say?
Well, I'm asking you, for the audience's sake.
You tell me.
This isn't a review episode.
Come on, you can do it, Tim.
I'm asking you how it's different.
Well, Calvin didn't discuss reproductive material taken out of him. He just said that they took blood and then they put some other liquid in me. That's what he said.
There was a story about Charlie and Calvin before they both got abducted, right? With Charlie saving Calvin's life. Is that what they claimed?
Yeah. Calvin and Charlie were fishing another time on a different river, and Calvin apparently fell in and he pulled him out.
That part was really weird to me because I wondered if that had something to do with why they were abducted.
Why? Why so?
Well, I don't know. They were chosen out of how many people assuming this is true, they were chosen out of however many people there are in that area or wherever they wanted to go, Yeah,
I mean, it's anybody's best guess why these people are chosen. I don't know. There's stories within the whole abduction phenomenon that people are part of like a bloodline. And, if these are some kind of scientific mission from a non-human intelligence, maybe they're, checking out a consistent record of some kind of bloodline. I don't know.
Was there any other type of behavior that these two individuals exhibited? Were they big drinkers? Did they have a reputation in town?
So Calvin Parker had a reputation for fighting. I think that he had trouble with the law, I guess, with like drinking and stuff like that, but not Charlie. Charlie was not a felon neither of them were felons, but typical Mississippi men.
Yeah, I asked because you mentioned the Sheriff Diamond, and he claims that this happened to him. So I just wanted to sort of paint the picture, like, if he didn't believe them, if these were two individuals with a bad reputation, he's not going to back them up, right? He probably wouldn't say anything that would fall in line with what they were talking about, do you think?
I don't know why. Like, I think he believed that something happened to them that night because he made this secret recording of them when they were in the police station. He wanted to see if they were going to admit when they left the room that they were lying or that they were worried or something. But in fact, they just were super panicked and still talking about how crazy the incident was. Plus the fact that Sheriff Fred Diamond saw himself the UFO, I think that, convinced him something might have happened here. They were examined by two different doctors. So they were interviewed by J. Allen Hynek, who previously worked on Project Blue Book, and a guy named James Harder. And these guys proclaimed that they believed these men were telling the truth. And J. Allen Hynek had a long history with UFO cases prior to this and probably met lots of different people that claimed similar things. And it was interesting that he thought they were the real deal. And then there was another medical doctor that examined them too. And they found traces of wounds on them where they said that when they were taken by these beings, that they were injected with something that kind of sedated them. So just little details like that, I think, convinced all the different people that spoke to them and examined them that something really did happen.
I think it's Charlie who has the account of sort of believing that these beings are robots being controlled from somewhere else. Did I get that right? Is that Charlie?
Yeah. So Charlie was pretty much the front runner for this story for decades because Calvin just disappeared. He didn't want to talk about it. He stayed out of the spotlight. Charlie said that he believed that there was an intelligence that operated the craft and operated these robots. He also said that he had follow-up experiences with this intelligence. He didn't see them in person again. He had UFO encounters with them, with his family, and then he was called to certain places psychically.
Right, so his body is in one spot, never moves, but somehow they have infiltrated his mind.
That's what he says. Yeah, there was some kind of telepathic communication going on.
Right, for how long after?
Decades.
Is that something that you found is common in other stories?
There are experiencers, even Betty and Barney Hill, when they recalled first being taken, their car was deactivated. They saw this light on the horizon approaching them, and then they started getting communication from the distance in their minds to get out of the car, not to move, stay there, we're coming to take you, and stuff like that. So this sort of telepathic aspect is something that's reported quite commonly in UFO cases. Yeah.
Sometimes I think it would be comforting to have some control from another place. You'd have to imagine you'd be safe. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea.
That's a weird statement.
Yeah,
Tim.
It's pretty scary.
Sounds terrifying to me.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Tell us more about this Philip Mantle character.
So Philip Mantle is a British ufologist. He's a guy that's been researching UFOs since he was a young man. He was part of pretty much the MUFON of Britain. He set up UFO hotlines with his friends who were also into this stuff, and they researched and interviewed all kinds of witnesses to UFO cases across the UK and also across Europe. He became a publisher because he was trying to submit these UFO books and stuff to different publishers across Europe, and they kept denying him. So he made his own publishing company, found success in releasing these books himself on other investigations that happened throughout Europe. He's had his own UFO encounters as well.
Do those UFO encounters happen after he writes the books or before he writes the books?
That's a good question. I think you'd have to ask him. I can't remember when, but he did say in the documentary series that he had his own UFO encounter. Yeah.
Let's talk about skeptics for a little bit. Can you describe some of the more outspoken skeptics of Parker and Hickson?
Well, one of them is definitely Philip J. Klass. He was the editor of an aerospace magazine for decades. An interesting thing about Philip J. Klass is that everybody just thought he was a non-believer and he had strength in standing up for his beliefs and stuff. But a lady named Kathleen Marden and Stanton Friedman did some investigating into his past. They published a book, but you can look them up, those two researchers, and they recovered documents and receipts that proved that Philip J. Klass was actually paid by the CIA to be a debunker, to go to conferences, to go after cases in the public and write about them and go on Larry King Live and battle these people that were trying to tell these outlandish stories. With regards to another abductee case, Travis Walton's best friend had proof that Philip J. Klass came to him and offered him $10,000 to say that it was all a made up story and that he never saw a UFO that night and, Travis never got abducted and stuff. But his friend instead said, no, I don't want your money, and told the people that that's what happened. That's probably the biggest critic of this story. He tried to go after, Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker, just saying that they just wanted attention, but he didn't have enough proof to fully debunk them, in my opinion, and that there was UFO cases, like encounters happening that night.
Well, if they're still paying for stories, maybe I'll be quiet about it.
$10K, that's pretty good. Back in the 70s, that would have been nice.
Yeah.
I'll take like two.
Oh, wow. They're cheap.
Now, Darcy, I'm sure you've been following the news about these drones. I know this isn't a part of your docuseries, but I'm just curious your opinion on this wild story.
Yeah, it's like really, really weird. I was just watching, I think the mayor of New Jersey stated on television just yesterday that he's witnessed himself these drones turning from balls of light, like spheres, into mechanical craft.
What?
Yeah. You just Google that, like mayor of New Jersey states he's seen drones turn from ball of light. And it's like he did a press conference and spoke of this. The caveat is that he doesn't know if that's an effect from the craft being far away. And then when it comes close enough, a camera or the eye shows it to be a drone eventually, which I think is kind of funny because he might have just explained that right there. But there have been people that have seen just straight up like balls of light flying around with the drones. There's a really interesting video of a sphere of light over New Jersey, and you see one of these drones go towards it. That's like a civilian drone, not one of these random drones that people have been seeing. And as soon as the civilian drone gets within enough feet of it, it just gets like shot out of the air and you see this like light blinking as it approaches to hit the ground. It's a really strange phenomenon because no one is giving an answer yet as to like no department, no intelligence group. It's not the Department of Homeland Security's drones. It's not the Coast Guards. It's not a swarm that's been dispatched by the military of some kind, the Air Force, for example. So whose are they? That's like the biggest question. And why are the powers that be not shooting them out of the air or proclaiming that they're an enemies or something like that? I've seen videos where some UFOs are seen in the air. And I think the answer to that is that because so many people's like attention is on the drones right now over New Jersey, they're turning their cameras on and recording more footage than they ever have before of the sky. And we're getting some legit UFO videos coming from that because so many cameras are on the sky. But then that's mixed in with actual drone activity. I think the drones are still just mechanical drones. I just don't know whose they are.
Yeah, we didn't intend to go down this rabbit hole, but since we're here and you're giving such great answers on the drones and your opinion on what they are, What's your opinion on why every statement, and I only thought of this because I read I looked up the mayor of New Jersey and seeing the orbs turn into drones. He prefaces his statement with what everybody else is saying is that they don't think that this is a matter of national security. Why do they always come out with that statement first when they follow up with, but we're not sure where they're coming from? But isn't that a contradiction?
Don't freak out.
Don't freak out, but we don't know anything.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Okay.
Don't freak out. It's just perception and control of the narrative. You don't want people to freak out about this because they're not going to go to work and they're not going to function normally if they are living in fear. That's like a great debilitator of progress and economic activity, I'd say. So, of course, they're going to preface that with don't freak out. We got this under control, that type of thing, right? They don't seem to be doing any harm to anybody. They're just like more of a nuisance or an oddity. So, yeah, you probably don't have to freak out. It could be some kind of like operation that's being conducted by an agency of some form that's American, and they don't want to admit it because A, they don't want to cause panic, and B, they're not ready to explain what it's really for. If it is, some new kind of drone fleet that is used for war or used for sniffing out nuclear material or something like that, which was an earlier theory to this whole phenomenon. There were people proclaiming that they were actually trying to find a nuclear warhead that was lost in Ukraine or a dirty bomb that's in a suitcase or something like that. And then that was all squashed as, BS. They might not be looking for something, but they might be practicing. So, in the event that something like that actually does get reported to be somewhere in the United States, you can send this drone swarm out to stop that dangerous force, right?
Well, I think it's aliens shape-shifting into drones. That's what I think. That's my theory.
I believe you.
No one can prove that theory wrong.
Not yet.
So where can our listeners watch Pascagoula 73?
It's live on Amazon Prime right now. You can watch all 4 episodes. The first episode is Charlie Hickson's story. The second episode is Calvin Parker's. The third is Maria and Jerry Blair. And the fourth is kind of dedicated to telling the backstory of who this brave narrator of the story, of the Pascagoula story is, which is Philip Mantle, his background, and how he got connected to this story specifically.
There are a number of reasons why people should watch your docuseries and other docuseries on UFO encounters and the experiencers who tell their stories. But if there's one thing that people should be taking away from your docuseries, what do you hope that is?
Maybe we're not alone.
It's just a matter of opening up your perception and understanding that we perhaps don't live in a universe that consists of just one intelligent life form.
Yeah, maybe we're not the most intelligent life form.
I can safely say I'm not the most intelligent life form.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
Well, thank you so much, Darcy, for spending some time with us here today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.